Hello everyone, and welcome to my studio. We are going to start this session today learning a little bit about a mold making material, a waste mold material called alginate. You're going to be receiving your alginate in a plastic bag. You'll get 2 pounds of it, and you'll notice, you'll be able to tell the difference between that and the other substance you receive because it's got a pink to purple kind of color, a little bit of a lavendery kind of color to it. And as it sort of meets water, that pinkness, that lavenderiness actually becomes more emphasized. So anyway, this is your mold making material. This is what we call a waste mold material. After one use, your casting is pretty much over. In some instances, you can use it to cast 2, 3, 4 times, but it will degrade quickly. This particular material is made from algae, hence the name, Alginate. Alginate. So it's made from algae. In fact, why that's meaningful to you perhaps, or where you've seen that in your life, is in like gummy candies. The starch that they use to hold together a gummy candy to give you that clear, chewy substance comes from algae. It's an agar, A-G-A-A-R. So in this case, we're using that starch to produce a non-toxic mold. There are some other fillers in this that make it not absolutely safe to eat, but it's not something that's going to hurt you if you accidentally ingest it. So if you breathe the powder a little bit, it's a lot less dangerous than other mold making materials. So what we're going to do is a quick mold making demonstration, a simple mold making demonstration first using the alginate, and I'm going to go through the details here. Make sure that you're keeping careful notes as we go so that you can reproduce this process from your notes. So what we have to have is a couple of cups to start with. You're going to be making really small molds and small cast objects. So in this case, I'm just using a couple of paper cups. I believe we've provided you with some plastic ones. And alginate is a really simple material to work with. You basically need to mix the alginate powder, which is very fine, like flour almost. You need to mix the alginate powder 1-to-1 by volume with water. Now the water needs to be at about 80 degrees. So think of a warm swimming pool or a tropical beach, like the temperature of that water. It doesn't have to be absolutely dead precise, but the closer you are to that 80-degree mark, the better your results. Now another thing you have to know about alginate is once you've combined the water and the powder, you have to mix it quickly, and you have to get your object that you want to cast into it really fast. Now that's important. You've got about 15 to 20 seconds of mixing time before you get your object in there, or it'll start to set up. It can start to take a texture kind of like cottage cheese, and at that point it won't conform to the object you're trying to cast. Part of what makes alginate such a wonderful material is the remarkable details it renders. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to cast my finger. I'm just going to mix up a batch of alginate, stick my finger in there, and let it set. Okay, it takes 8 minutes. 8 minutes for the alginate to set. I'll repeat these details as I go along. So about 8 minutes to set, then I can remove my finger. One thing alginate's used for frequently is for body casting. So hands, faces, fingers, toes, that kind of thing. Our bodies are flexible and malleable, so if I push my finger into this alginate mold, which ends up being something like the texture of a gummy worm, I can flex my finger and move it around and eventually pull it out of the mold and leave behind a really fantastic impression of my finger, including all of the details of my fingerprints and such when I come to the casting part of the process. So here's how it's going to work. I'm going to start by measuring out some alginate. Now what I'm going to recommend to you is that you don't use too much more than like a half a cup. You don't have to be super precise in terms of like deciding, oh, I'm going to use exactly half a cup and then I'm going to make a mark and do that in the next cup. Although it's not a bad practice actually. You can see I've put some alginate in that cup. And what I can do, and just for the sake of demonstration, let's do this. I'm going to just let it settle. I'm going to hold it up to the light so I can see the level of alginate. And I'm going to mark my cup. I've made a mark right here. Now I'm going to pour that alginate into a second cup. You can see it is powdery. It does get airborne. But again, pretty non-toxic, so I'm not sweating doing this without a mask. Then I'm going to take my 80-degree water and I'll just fill it up to that mark I just made. That's actually not a bad approach to doing this. Oftentimes I'll just eyeball it. You can actually be that cavalier. As long as you're within just half an ounce or so, you're going to be okay at this volume. But those are actually both filled up to just about the same level. I don't know if we're going to be able to see in there or not. Filled up to just about the same level here. I got to move the focal point. All right. So, the next thing we have to prepare for is the mixing. Now, before I do that, I'm going to take my cell phone and I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to set my timer. I'm going to set my timer for 8 minutes. All right, that's how long it takes for the alginate to set up. So I want an 8-minute setup process. So after it's fully mixed, which should only take about 15 to 20 seconds, then I'm going to stick in my object that I want to cast, and I'm going to let it sit for 8 minutes. Now what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to mix my material. I'm going to stick in my finger in this case, and then I'm going to just come over and turn off the camera, and we'll call that the end of this particular video. So I want you to make sure you get the notes up to this point. So I'll just walk you through it really quick. First thing we're going to do is we're going to mix this alginate, and what I like to use myself is chopsticks. Now if you happen to go and get Chinese food every once in a while, this might be a great place for you to pick up chopsticks. We provided you with popsicle sticks. That's another great way to mix this material. So, mine just came like that, and then I'll go ahead and use my chopsticks to do my mixing. So here it is. Equal parts by volume, 80-degree water, and alginate. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to pour my water into my alginate. So I'm not going to go the other way around. It's too hard for me to get the alginate to settle into the water because it's so light and fluffy. Much easier for me to pour the water into the alginate cup. Now again, I would be very careful not, and you can see I'm starting with a relatively gentle mix just to sort of like get the water onto the surface, get the alginate generally wet, and then I'm going to move on to mixing it relatively quickly. I want to really sort of give that a good stir once I get most of the water absorbed. And again, this has to go fast, and I'm looking for a smooth texture. It's like I'm making some weird flavored gummy concoction. Now I just kicked up a little bit of powder off the bottom. Make sure you're hitting all the edges and the sides. You can see that starting to set up. That's nice and smooth in my cup. You're looking for a good, smooth consistency. Am I going to get that to focus or not? There we go. Nice, smooth consistency. So I've gone a little bit over that time I said. I'm just going to go ahead and I'm going to lay my chopsticks right down on my table. And I'm going to go ahead and stick my finger in. Boom, like that. And I'm going to start my timer. Now the thing you want to do is make sure you keep that finger still. What I like to do if I'm casting a finger, and you may not be doing this, is push it all the way to the bottom and then just pull it back up just a little bit. You want to make sure you have at least, if you can, an inch of alginate on all sides around your the object you're working with. On the bottom, on the sides. In a cup like this, that's not going to be very much material, okay? You're not going to be able to put a very big object in a mold the size of this cup. So we're going to go ahead and call it for right now. That's going to be the end of this video. We'll come back, pull our finger out, and talk about the next step.